everybody to our DELISA webinar on November 5th, 2020. We're going to be hearing from a special guest today, coordinated by our symposiarch, Luke Henke. And take it away, Luke.
All right, thank you, Michael. So today we're going to be speaking with Paige Harrington. She is a public historian who specializes in 20th century women's history. She is currently the Vice President of Cultural Assets at Girl Scouts of the United States of America. And there she oversees and maintains a collection of over 6,500 artifacts. And she's also in control of the Juliette Gordon Love Birthplace in Savannah, Georgia. She is the former executive director of the National Women's Party at the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, and also the co-founder of the Women's Vote Centennial Initiative. She holds 2 master's degrees from the University of San Diego. Those degrees are in public history and preservation, and the other degree is in nonprofit management. Thank you, Paige, for joining us. We really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Luke.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start off this conversation by asking, what initially interested you in the field of public history? And I know that you don't have a degree in library and information science, but that is heavily related to the work that you do. So could you tell us how you first became interested in this field?
Absolutely. So I'm really interested and have always been interested in history, but more than just history as a series of, dates and names. Actually, I'm really bad at remembering dates and names, but I like the stories. I like to know what happened and who were the key players and how did they change something in their family, perhaps in their community or in their school or something along those lines. So for me, being able to work directly with historic documents, collections, special collections, and then also museum artifacts was kind of a bit of a dream come true. So I really like the ability to be able to take just what is maybe on its face value, a particular piece of paper or some type of a document or some type of an object like a cup, and then be able to explain it to people in the public as to why it's important, and perhaps maybe even getting them to think a little bit more deeply about a subject. So history doesn't have to be necessarily just names and dates. I think it's really about making a connection with the people, and that's what I've always tried to do.
Awesome. I think a lot of us could relate to that sentiment. How did you begin your career?
Well, my very first job out of graduate school, I was archivist of a real small regional historical society, and they were in the process of renovating a historic structure. And so staff had moved out and they were in temporary office quarters. And so I started literally, I graduated like on a Wednesday, and the next Monday I started work, which is unheard of. No one gets a job that fast, right? But I had an internship with the organization probably about a year before that, and they remembered me and had an opening and called me, and I started right away. So I was the archivist for this really small little organization, but what it allowed me to do was get my first taste of what it was actually like to set up a research library, because they hadn't had one before. But when we moved into the newly renovated building, I got to be the one that set it up from scratch. So it was really a great opportunity for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity. What other jobs have you had throughout your career?
So I put myself through college working as a pharmacy technician. So for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the person who doesn't have a license. I was just a technician, so I was working, of course, under various pharmacists. But you stand in the back and you count pills and you put them in bags and you assist with, helping the customers and all of that sort of thing. And it was a decent job. I didn't have to deliver pizza or be a waitress or lots of other things that you do when you're putting yourself through college. So it gave me a chance to make a little bit of extra money, which was nice. But I also knew that wasn't the career that I wanted to be in. So I did that for multiple years, actually, when I was finishing my bachelor's degree, and then right before I started the first master's degree. And then right after I mentioned the very first position that I had, that was for a small historical society. And from there, I left and went to a historic preservation firm. So they actually, it was an office full of architects, and they were doing renovations. And so I wanted to learn about the process of how you renovate a building, a historic building, and how you document the historicity of it. So, you know, the various finishes and everything. And so that was a real technical kind of position, but I really enjoyed that work. Didn't necessarily want to do it full time for the rest of my career, but it was a good learning experience for me.
What are some of the most challenging experiences that you've had throughout your career?
Well, there have been a lot, and I think no matter what career path you choose and wherever you are in your career, you're going to have times that are just going to be more difficult for various reasons. I can remember a couple of things that particularly stand out. And first, let me say I've been doing this work for about 25 years, so I've got a pretty good kind of, you know, stretch of experience there. When I was in that very first position that I mentioned at the Small Historical Society, one of the things that we did to raise money every year was to have an art and antique auction. So people would make donations of things, not certainly, of course, not collections, but, you know, paintings that didn't have any necessarily historic value, smaller pieces, figurines and that sort of thing. Sometimes there were local artists that would donate objects for us to sell. And again, it was a money-making venture for us. So it was an auction, and it was a live auction, which was a lot of fun. It was really hard to set up, but it was a lot of fun. One local business in town, they'd had an Italian restaurant in town for many, many years, and they'd closed it just a few years earlier. And they offered to give us this, you know, one of those old-fashioned kind of cash registers, those really great things, and they had gold and filigree all over it and everything. It was real cool. Anyway, they didn't use it in the day-to-day operations, but they'd had it, and it was in the building for a long, long time. And they offered to give it to us so that we could sell it at the auction. And so we proceeded to do just that. And a couple of years later, both of the people, the two owners of the restaurant, it was a man and his wife, they passed away. And so the family came back, the children, there was a son and came back and said, we understand that that our parents gave you this for the museum, and we'd really like to have it back. And so that's, you know, difficult right there. You all know this, that once somebody gives you something and you accession it into the collection, giving it back is extremely complicated and not done, you know, unless the situation demands it. But for this particular case, they didn't give it to us for the collection. They gave it to us to sell, and we did. And so I was horrified, right? Here's this nice family, and they wanted this piece of their personal history back, and I had sold it. And I just felt horrible. That said, you know, we did it all by the book, of course, and they had given us a donation form, and we were very clear about what we were going to do with it. And the only thing at that point that I could do was to say, you know, to the family, again, apologize that, you know, that I had played a part in this. Even though I wasn't at fault, I still, of course, felt bad. And I went to the people who had purchased it at the auction, and I just said, you know, may I please put you in touch with the family, because they were, you know, they were really interested in maybe being able to buy it back from you. And so at least I could, you know, make that introduction. I don't know if they were able to get it back, but and that's been, you know, 20 years, and I still feel awful about it. But again, you know, that's what the family, that's what the parents had wanted, and that's what we did. And anyway, it's just one of those situations that was kind of difficult. I guess on the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that I have also unfortunately had to deal with at a couple of different institutions is, you know, economic downturn. And when you have an organization that may be in flux, and you have positions that are eliminated and that sort of thing. I've had that happen a few times. In 2008, when we had the economic downturn, of course, that happened with multiple sites. And I know it took the organization that I was working at, as well as many others, it takes years to come back from that. So that's certainly a hard thing to have to go through for everyone.
Certainly. And that kind of filters in well to my next question, which is, in your opinion, how has the field changed since you started working? And if you could, um, mention a little bit about how you think COVID has affected things.
Okay. So I think one of the biggest things that's different since that very first job is the use of technology in all the different arenas. So clearly, there were early digitization opportunities, but of course they were the technology now would seem laughable because it was so out of date. But we were trying, of course, to make sure that we could digitize so that we could preserve and be good stewards of various collections and different pieces, and then also be able to share them with the public. At that point, websites weren't even really interactive to the degree that they are right now. So it was really very different. And then if you think about things like social media and the way that we're interacting with how we're trying to share pieces from the collection with various people, public, different communities, etc., it's of course very different. And in my opinion, it's increased participation. It's increased the many ways that we can share those stories and be able to excite people in various places, so they don't have to physically come into your location. You can actually make a connection with them. I think that's fantastic, because I think it just increases the importance and the value of what we do as professionals. But also, I think it really allows people to make a connection to something that they may never get into. They may never be able to physically see themselves. I work in the Washington, D.C. area right now, and up in New York City, and so I know that there are lots and lots of people in this country that are never going to be able to come to the East Coast and see these things. So it's nice when we can use technology and share them. I think because of COVID, I think of course there are so many negatives to this. Clearly, economics, health, families, people being separated, etc. But if there was, I don't want to even call it a silver lining, but I think one of the things that I am excited about is the fact that online programs and being able to connect people and share relevant information and even interpretation and programmatic content, I think it's being normalized a little bit more. So doing things online is no longer just a one-off. It's really required now, clearly, because you can't meet in person. But also, as I said, it's becoming more normal. You've got people who would never have thought that they would be willing to do that, or that there would be any interest in having a Zoom program or something to listen to, let's say, a lecture on history or a book author or something like that. And now it's fairly common, fairly normal. So I think that's a good thing for our field.
Yeah, I think access and engagement with different collections is extremely important. So I think that's a good point that you've made.
Yeah.
So with the next few questions, I want to turn more towards the workplace,
Okay.
and specifically talking about the importance of flexibility within the workplace. So as someone who is in authoritative positions in different fields, when you're considering someone for a position, what are some of the most undesirable qualities that they may have?
I think first off, just to give a very general answer, I think one of the things, especially that I've seen with emerging professionals, so those of you who are coming directly out of a program and are looking to get maybe your first job or your first paying job outside of being an intern, I think one of the things that I would stress is recognizing that you were hired because you're an expert. And what I have seen is, which I feel is detrimental, is when an emerging professional comes in and they're way too timid or hesitant. I've got, too many examples, which I won't go into, but too many examples of where, I've given a project to someone and have them come back incessantly with 30 different questions. And I'm not saying that asking questions is wrong or bad, because it's not, it's good. But oftentimes you are expected, again, you are the professional and you are the expert that just got hired. You are expected to do, this larger job. So somebody like myself, who's in a management position, is expecting you to go forward and do all of the work. And if you have questions and need clarifications, absolutely come back and ask those questions, but then move forward to actually get the work done. What I have found is that I start to tell people, come back to me when you get stuck, right? If you don't know what to do, or if you've gotten to a certain point and you're not sure what to do, come back and ask me those questions. But before you come back and ask me those questions, think about what are some of the questions that I might ask you, so that you are prepared to give me the information. In other words, it's not just hey, I've gotten stuck and I don't know what to do. Well, you need to come back, you need to brief me, tell me all the things you tried, what didn't work, and then make some suggestions. And then together we'll figure out what's the next step for the project. I've had in a couple of instances, I've had people who I've given the tasks to, and they aren't able to do it for whatever reason, but they don't come and ask either. And they just sort of sit and wait for somebody to say, how are you doing? Or what are you doing? Or are you, do you need anything? When really you need to be very proactive. Again, you're the expert. You were hired to take care of this. Come in and tell the person in charge what they need. And I found that sometimes people are a little bit too hesitant. And I would think that, again, you don't have to be overly aggressive, but you do have to make sure that you have all the information that you need in order to do the job that you were hired to do. So I would say make sure that you're advocating for yourself, to make sure that you have all of the information and all of the materials that you need in order to get your job done.
I think that's really good advice. On the flip side of that, what are some of the more desirable qualities? What are some of the things you would directly look for when you're hiring a candidate?
So I look for, if I'm interviewing you, it's because I've ran through your resume and you are completely qualified for the job, right? If you've gotten an interview, you should know that right up front. They're not going to give you an interview if you only have half the qualifications. So if you're talking to somebody on the phone, you're qualified, right? Now you have to sell yourself. And one of the things that I always like to learn about people is what do you do when you're confronted with a situation where you're not sure what to do? So the answer to the last question, which is, do you go out and seek information? Do you ask questions? Do you try to solve problems, that sort of thing? But I also really like it when people are able to show that they have a variety of experiences. What I have found is that, especially emerging professionals, they may have, not a lot of, it could be a very short resume, in other words, and it should be if you're just out of the university and you're just looking for perhaps your first full-time position. You don't have that much experience. That said, I really want to make sure that you have learned as much as possible in whatever positions that you were in, even if it was an internship. Remember when I said my very first paid position came because I had an internship with an organization, and they remembered me, they liked my work, and so they came back and said, we've got this opening, would you like to interview for it? So remember that when you're, even if it's an internship or a part-time type of situation, you should always be volunteering in ways that you will learn new information. So let's say you were hired just to do a digitization project. That's great. Make sure that you do that to the best of your ability and do everything that you were hired to do. That said, you should always be keeping your eyes and ears open for new things that you could learn. Did you learn about, were you able to take the digitized material and do something else with it, right? So in other words, were you just a small part of that task, or were you looking at it and saying, oh, well, this is a bigger project and I might be this small little piece of it, but I want to learn about the other pieces as well. See, that's where you get extra experience out of even just a very, part-time entry-level position. It's because you keep your eyes and your ears open and you make sure that you let people know that you're willing to learn and that you want to try new things. And then you're able to add more to your resume.
Awesome. And so talking about resume building, what do you think are some skills for working in libraries, archives, museums, and other information organizations?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So I tend to think of it in kind of three different buckets. The first is, what your technical skills are, right? So you've gone to, get a master's degree, and this is your technical skills that you have learned while you're there. Incredibly important, right? Obviously, you've worked hard, and these are great skills for you to have. That said, you also need to be working on a couple of other things, in my opinion. One is, how are you as a coworker? Are you easy to work with? Are you friendly? Are you helpful? And I'm not talking about being, most popular person in the break room or anything like that, always cracking jokes and that sort of thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, do you show up every day on time? Are you well prepared for what you were supposed to be doing? Are you eager to help colleagues out, with an extra project if you have time and if it is appropriate, that sort of thing. So again, are you eager to learn? Are you interested in finding out what's the rest of the organization doing? Not just me and my little part, but what are some of these other things that you can be learning? To that end, one of the things that I think is incredibly important for anyone working in our field is, I think you should have, if you are able, have at least a decent understanding of what fundraising looks like for your profession and in your field, and also some type of outreach or PR. So those are two kind of components that are really outside of your skill set, correct? You probably don't even have classes in that. I know I didn't. But why? So you might be asking, so why do I think that's important? Well, because for any organization, those are two components where that work is incredibly critical. And those people that run the fundraising and that run the marketing and PR and social marketing outreach and that sort of thing, they're the ones that keep the dollars coming in and keep the interest coming in so that you're able to do what you do. If there's no fundraising and there's no PR or marketing, you probably aren't, as a staff person, probably aren't going to have all of the resources that you need in order to do your job. No one has ever said, I'm going to digitize all of these records and then I'm going to hide them away and not share them with anybody. That's not what we do. We want to do the work so that we're good stewards of our collection, and that way we can then share them with others. But it's the fundraising and the marketing side of things that actually gets the word out so that the public is able to see what you do and appreciate what you do. And I'm not saying that you need to be the one going out and saying, hi, Mr. Jones, I'd like to have you make a gift to us today of $500,000. That's what I'm saying. But you know what you need to be aware of is, does your institution or organization have an annual giving campaign? What does that look like? Do you send out emails? Do you send out letters? Do you have events that are specifically for donors and fundraisers? These are just things that it would be helpful for you to understand. And you may, in your capacity, as I did many, many, many times, is when somebody from the fundraising department calls up and says, hey, I have a big donor that wants to come through and do a tour of the archive. Do you think you could pull out, something interesting and show them when they come through? That's fantastic. That's a great opportunity for you to be able to have a direct interaction with a donor and be able to wow them with something that you have in the collection that you get to see maybe every day and others don't get to. So again, it's not you being on the front line having to go out and do your own fundraising. Although when you get to a certain level, when I went from being an archivist to being a collection manager and then to being an executive director, clearly as an executive director, you are required to fundraise. So it's important that you have that kind of built-in understanding and knowledge of the way that those things function, because it just helps you do your job better. And that way, you're able to be a better coworker. Maybe you can go to the fundraising department and say, hey, you know what, we just got in this really interesting collection, and I think it might be interesting for donor XYZ that I met at the exhibit opening last week, or something along those lines. Who knows? But that could be extremely beneficial for your organization, and it just helps you, again, learn new skills and find better ways to make sure that you're supporting your collection with all of the skill set that you have.
Thank you. So in conclusion, lastly, you've been giving us advice this entire time, but do you have any final words of advice that you would give to a graduating student or somebody who is just starting their profession?
Um, it's interesting. I've had, let's see, I've had a few people over the years when I worked at big organizations and then when I worked at smaller organizations. I found that a lot of people who were interviewing for their very first position or first full-time position tell me that they were hesitant to take a position at a smaller organization. They really wanted to work for a big organization. They really, they thought that they'd be able to reach more people and that sort of thing. And I always try to encourage people that, if you get an opportunity to work for a smaller organization, you should really, jump at the chance. That very first position that I worked at that little bitty historical society, it had a full-time staff of 4, and I was one of them. So it was very small. But I learned so much in the first few years that I was there because the organization is small. You have to multitask and you have to learn. The PR person who sat right next to me, I had to work with her and help her in various ways and vice versa. So, she learned a lot about my job and I learned a lot about her job as well. And so those are things that you don't, maybe not, again, a skill that you learn while you're in school, but you can learn a lot of valuable information. And I find that you also get a lot of responsibility that goes even past like you being an entry-level position. I've noticed over the years that when I've interviewed people and a lot of their experience has come from smaller organizations, I find that they actually are much more well-rounded as a professional and a candidate for a position than people who have been working at large institutions for their entire career. I once hired somebody who had a bachelor's degree and had worked solely for small organizations, but he was fantastic. And the second choice candidate had worked for, and this was when I was in Washington, D.C., the second candidate had started as an intern at the Smithsonian and had only worked there for about 5 years, but they had such narrow experience because they'd worked at an institution that was so large that they didn't have to do anything else. All they had to do was what their very narrow skill set was, and they were extremely good at it and very well qualified, but they weren't, in my opinion, well-rounded. So they weren't able to do as many things and maybe take advantage of, some new opportunities as this other gentleman was. And I hired him and I was very impressed.
Well, I think that out of everything, we've learned that flexibility and in the workplace is extremely important. So that was my final question for you. Are there any other questions that other folks might have? Or Michael, did you have any questions?
No, but I do want to thank Paige for coming and talking to us today and remind everybody listening and viewing this that we will be offering LAS 263 Marketing and Advocacy in Information Organizations. That course will be running in the spring. So now that registration is open, consider it. You can reach out to Dr. Singh, who's the instructor. He designed the course, and he's going to be teaching it. So you can reach out to Dr. Singh for more information about what is in the course. I'm not sure that he goes into fundraising, but it is a very important aspect to just consider to be aware of because, as Paige mentioned, any number of you will be graduating and moving into a nonprofit institution, and there will be, at some point, there will be a campaign that they have to run to do something. And if you can be mindful of this, it comes with a lot of experience, but collection specific events and openings and exhibits are key for a lot of this because you want to give the public that interaction. And a lot of people will, they may not have the intention of making a major donation, but they enjoy themselves and they see the value of your collection. Will definitely cut a check for the institution. And that's something that we may not want to do it, but it's something that's required of our practice is to have some experience. And you don't have to be soliciting, but you do have to be welcoming.
Yeah.
All right, so let's hear a question from Ryan. Hi, Paige. Thank you for your participation in this webinar today. Your tips have been so helpful and insightful. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on continuing education. More specifically, how important has continuing education been for you throughout your career, and possibly any tips that you might have? Thank you again.
Thank you very much. That's such a good question. I think continuing education is something that is and should be at the forefront of everyone. I know the last thing that you probably want to think about when you just get out of school and now you're working in your first position is trying to find, new things to go out and learn. But what I can tell you is that in particular, I think our field is changing, especially the technology aspect, so rapidly. And now with, as we talked about earlier, with the influx of online programming and that sort of thing, I think just being abreast of trends in the field, I think that's incredibly important. I have learned over the years from so many really critical pieces that have added to my understanding of the field and how I can work in this field just by attending conferences. I've noticed that a lot of places now are offering, or a lot of organizations now are offering online components to conferences, which are often less expensive and don't include, of course, travel and lodging expenses, but they are really incredibly valuable. I'd worked in the field for only about 5 years when I decided to actually go back and get a second master's degree. I did not have a lot of time to do it. I certainly didn't have the money to do it. But I really recognized the fact that if I was going to progress in my career and go along into a more upper management field, that I was going to need to have I was going to need the experience, but I was also going to have the actual technical skills that come with the legal aspect of working for museums and nonprofits, the ethics piece of it, the finance piece of it. Budgets can be extremely complicated, and also, giving and the governance laws around nonprofits. And so I found that, in less than 5 years, I was actually back to get a second master's degree. But the interesting thing about it is that I continue to use the skills in both of those different programs interchangeably. And I can't say that one was more important than the other than the first one gave me the technical skill set in public history and collection management to be able to do what I do. And then the second one actually gave me more technical skills, which is, again, in the administration and the governance side of things. And I'm not saying that you've got to go run out and get, another master's degree, not by any stretch, but there are ways for you to get those skills. And again, for you to always remain abreast of the trends in in the organizations, but also in our field. And just be connected with your colleagues. I think that'll go a long way and help you.
Yeah, I'll speak to our program here. Students who graduate with the MS-LIS from St. John's University are qualified for New York State certification as a public librarian. And in New York State, we do have a requirement of continuing ed, and you have to satisfy, I think it's 60 credits or 60 units of continuing education over a 5-year cycle to maintain your certification in New York State. And this is the law since 2010. So anybody certified after January 1, 2010 has that requirement in New York State. So join an association, right? So if you're in New York, you can get, I think if you're in maybe like 48 states, you can get a joint membership with the American Library Association and your state library association. And they put together events all the time. There's all kinds of instructional and continuing ed events offered by professional associations across the country. The joint membership for students is around $40 a year, and you can keep student level ALA for, I think, 3 years after you graduate. So for just $40 a year, you'll have access to their job bank and their training centers and all of their workshops, their conferences. So it's a good resource, and I encourage students in the program to start exploring the professional associations now, so that you're familiarizing and you get into that the calendar, the cyclical calendar of their trainings. They offer very technical trainings, specific software. You can always arrange with ILS vendors are always doing workshops to sell their products, pitch meetings. The interesting thing about New York State with the continuing ed is that if your library director or if your boss, your supervisor in any institution sends you to a training or authorizes you to go to one of these training, they can write a letter that says they considered it continuing education. And that letter is what you give to Albany to maintain your certification. So it's kind of loosey-goosey because it's new, but yeah, so continuing ed is vital and to professional development. And as Paige said, the technological side of it, yes, but also the socialization side, the networking side. Going to these events, you meet other practitioners and people who could potentially be sitting across the desk from you at a job interview. And so if they know that, hey, I saw you at that tech training, 6 months ago, that signals to them that you're interested in development and that you're being proactive in your professional development, and that might encourage them to offer you the job because they've seen you in the field, they've seen you out in the world. So it's very important to participate in the associations, and a lot of this stuff is virtual now. I mean, NILA is completely online this year. ALA Midwinter is going to be online, so there's a lot of opportunities. It does cost a little money, but any students interested in learning more about this can reach out to me, and we can explore it together. Any other questions, folks? All right, I think we are good. I'm going to take over the screen again and just do my little housekeeping. Upcoming dates. So right now, advisement is open and registration began yesterday. So returning students get registered for spring 2021 classes starting yesterday. Our next webinar is on a subject called Bitmoji librarianship. And this was one of our alumna is a branch manager in Queens Public Library, and she had to create all of these digital programs for her community. So she's going to walk us through her response to COVID, essentially, and how she used new tools and technologies to keep her programming going. And then finally, Thanksgiving recess will be November 23 to 28. University will be closed. All right. Well, thanks again, Paige, for joining us. The work you're doing is exceptional. Keep us abreast. We do have a mailing list, so anything that's happening out of Girl Scout cultural assets, let us know. We'd be happy to participate and attend your virtual events and your exhibits and anything else that comes out of your department. Thank you, Luke, for organizing. Thank you, Luke, for organizing, and you did such a good job moderating this that it may be your full-time job coming next semester. So. Thanks again, everybody. And like I said, the recording will be made available on YouTube and you'll all get the link. All right. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.